where, wherever we are in the world. Thank you for joining me today in our last session, glancing, fiddle with my, hope that means they're working. Our glimpses at the Mangalacarana verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so today's our last session in that series, and we'll take a look at the Bhagavatam's third verse. So over the last month, we spent two sessions on the first verse, one focusing on some highlights from Srila Prabhupada's purport, and the second, some highlights, well, taking a quick look at the 5 different readings that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggests for the first verse of the Bhagavatam. And then last week, we looked, and now the 3 verses, now I need to go backtrack here to discuss the Namaskar for a moment. As we heard from Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in the first chapter of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, a Mangalacarana has 3 parts. It has a Namaskar, which offers obeisances, recognizes, worships the subject, the deity of the text. And in our case, the subject of the text is Vasudeva Krishna. Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, and Devaki, the son of Nanda and Yashoda. And so there was extensive discussion of how we might read that verse, both in Srila Prabhupada's purport and in the 5 keep having trouble with my AirPods. I'm not sure how I'm connected here. I apologize. And then from Vishwanath Chakravarti, the 5 readings that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggests. Take a moment just to fiddle with my Bluetooth here, because I have a sense that I get better sound from my AirPods. Now it says we're connected. Let's see if that lasts. I have a sense that I get better sound from the AirPods than I do from my computer mic. So, nope, lost him again. So I'm just going to give up and hope that the sound is good enough through the computer's microphone. So the 5 different readings that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggests. And then last week we looked at the second of the verses, which the Namaskara and then the Vastu Nirdesha, according to Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Vastu Nirdesha is a statement of, well, not just the topic of the text, but the point of the text. And as we see, when we look at the second verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, we get told very explicitly not just what the point is that the Bhagavatam makes, but who is the most appropriate audience. And we'll get a little finer look at that in today's verse. And so we saw that the optimal audience for Srimad Bhagavatam, this uniquely wonderful text, is those whose hearts are completely pure because they've given up all self-interest. So we see at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, as Guru Maharaj, Swami Tripurari, frequently points out, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells us, he sums up everything he throws out everything he said, in a sense. He says, Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tvang sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. He says, listen, in the previous verse, I've said, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskara. I've repeated what I said at the very heart of the Bhagavatam, and the chapter often referred to as the most confidential knowledge. And as we look at the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is explicitly presenting the most confidential of all confidential knowledge, kinds of knowledge, Krishna builds his extolling of bhakti as the greatest thing, to the point where he gets toward the end in the 30th verse. He says, if someone has if someone's aspiration, as Srila Sridhar Maharaj likes to say, we're going to judge someone, we shouldn't judge them by their present. We should judge them by their future, by their prospects, by their aspiration. And so if someone's aspiration is exclusive devotion to me, even if they completely blow it and do something really awful, not just durachar, but sudurachar, something really, really awful, out of habit, because of some bad association or something like that, still that person is to be considered a sadhu. Person is to be considered saintly. Because, as he says in the next verse, bhakti has the power to quickly rectify everything. And the example is given by our acharyas that if someone has a fever today, but they're taking their medicine, tomorrow the fever will have gone down, and the day after the fever will be gone. So we can say, oh, he's really sick today, but he's going to be okay in a couple of days. So bhakti has the power to consume even the reactions to our most awful activities. And then he gets to the end and he says, watch out, I'm going to tell you something really secret now. And he says, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam, which boils down to just love me. Just love me. And then at the end of the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he winds up again. He just really winds it up and says, watch out. Here comes something more confidential than anything you've ever heard before. Buckle your seatbelt. And then he says, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam. Just love me. And then in the next verse, he tells us practically what that means, how we express that. And that is sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam. Take exclusive shelter in Krishna, having given up all conventional conceptions of dharma. Sarva dharman parityajya. Parityajya means not just tyaja means rejecting, parityajya means completely rejecting. And as Guru Maharaj likes to point out, the Bhagavatam picks up at the next step, right there, right at the next step. And it says, this text is for those who have already completely given up all kinds of cheating religion, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, vancha. They've given up all the 4 purusharthas, the 4 values of human life, the 4 things that we all strive to gain, virtue, material progress, pleasure, and ultimately liberation. He says, anyone who's given up the pursuit of completely rejected the pursuit of these things, and whose heart is completely pure, therefore completely pure, because they don't have any envy, they have no personal interest. Atmanikshepa, right? And this is one of the 6 characteristics of Sharanagati, which is the external expression of Shraddha, or faith in Krishna. So that faith is expressed by by Atmanikshepa, by giving up all personal interest, casting it away, throwing it away. So pra-ujhita in the Bhagavatam's language, completely rejecting Kaitava Dharma. Why Kaitava Dharma? Why cheating religion? Because it's self-centered. It's about my virtue, about my progress, about my pleasure. and about my freedom. But the Bhagavatam is for those who are beyond those things, who've already seen through those things and given them up. It was given to us by Veda Vyas in his maturity. This is not just Sanskrit. This is Samadhi Pasha. This is the language of trance, the language of mystic trance in love of Krishna, the language of prema. So then we see in the third verse, this is the third part of the Namaskar, which is the Ashirvada, or the blessing. And we see sometimes at the end of Ashtakams or other songs, there will be a Palastuti, a statement of the fruit of chanting that particular prayer to the Lord or to the devotees. Just as we see at the end of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Gurvashtakam. He says, Srimad Guru Rashtakame Turuchai Brahme Muhurte Patati Priyatnat Yastena Vrindavananatha Sakshat Sevaiva Labhya Janashonta Eva. That if someone chants these 8 beautiful verses glorifying the spiritual master daily during the Brahma Muhurta, he will certainly attain direct service to Radha and Krishna. So that's the Palastuti. And here, this Ashirvad, this blessing, is very much a Palastuti because of this very striking image that we see in this verse. So the verse, as we know, says, Nigama kalpataror galitam palam shukamukharam ritadrava samyutam vivata bhagavatam rasamalaya muhuraho rasika bhuvipavuka. Oh, expert and thoughtful men relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Srila Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful. Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including the liberated souls. So, in his purport to this third verse, following Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Srila Prabhupada points out the full implications of the reference to rasa in this verse, to taste. So he talks about the 12 sthai bhavas, the 5 mukhya ratis and the 7 gauna ratis. And we study those in the 3rd and 4th sections of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And so he explores those, and it shows how the Bhagavatam is actually to effect or bring about our experience of these rasas according to our qualification. And so we see here that not only is this meant for those who are pure at heart, as we see in verse 2, but this is meant for bhavukas. Bhavuka, Srila Prabhupada gives bhavuka here as expert and thoughtful. Monier Williams gives it, and his citation for this verse is the Bhagavatam verse. Those who are expert at relishing beauty and poetry and music, beauty in the arts, especially. And then we'll see as we look at Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this verse, we'll see something even a little more in a little while. So Srila Prabhupada points out that rasa is an exchange of love. And that in order to exchange rasa, we require persons. So this verse specifically tells us that this is going to be about personal love. This isn't for those who are merged in Sayuja Mukti. They can't appreciate this at all. Liberated souls can. Liberated souls, those who are free from material bondage, can relish it more than anybody. But really, it's especially for the bhavukas, for those who have taste for rasa. And so Srila Prabhupada says, he says, therefore, one who attains full knowledge of these different rasas, the 12 sthai bhavas, the 5 mukhya ratis and the 7 gona ratis that we study in Nectar of Devotion and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, someone who has full knowledge of these different rasas, which are the basic principle of activities. I mean, everything we do, even in the material world, is to get some taste. We engage in different activities to get some pleasure from them. We engage with other people in order to enjoy their company, in order to exchange, in order to enjoy some kind of exchange with them. He says that they can understand that the false representations of the original rasas, they can understand the falsity of the rasas that we see in the material world. We can see their flaws, their limitations at least. And so he says, in this shloka, it is definitely stated that spiritual rasa, which is relished even in the liberated stage, can be experienced in the literature of the Bhagavatam due to its being the ripened fruit of all Vedic knowledge. And the way he says to taste that fruit is by submissively hearing. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about how this has to be received from exactly the right source. So he talks about Guru Parampara. Said it was brought by Narada Muni from the spiritual world, given to his disciple Vyasadeva, and Vyasadeva in turn delivered the message of the Bhagavatam to his son Srila Shukadeva Goswami, who gave it to Maharaj Parikshit in turn. And so Srila Prabhupada points out that we need to be qualified to hear, but also we need to hear from the right source. And he talks about how important it is to receive this fruit through the chain of disciplic succession. So he writes in his purport, the subject matter is so presented through the lips of Srila Shukadeva Goswami that any sincere listener who hears submissively can at once relish transcendental tastes, which are distinct from the perverted tastes of the material world. Then he really focuses on disciplic succession. The ripened fruit is not dropped all of a sudden from the highest planet of Krishna Loka. Rather, it has come down carefully through the chain of disciplic succession without change or disturbance. So sometimes if you have a very high tree, very tall tree, and the ripest fruit is up at the top, and maybe you don't have a picker that's long enough with a handle that's long enough to get up there, someone may have to climb up there. But they're not just going to throw it down to me on the ground. Next to me, I have a couple of mango trees. Next to the hut where I stay here, I have a couple of mango trees that are probably 40 or more feet tall. And sometimes the very best fruits will be up there at the top where there's plenty of sunshine. So if someone were to climb, we have one devotee here who's an arborist and actually grew up largely on this property. And he's an incredibly expert tree climber. And he could climb up into that tree and pick those mangoes, but he wouldn't throw them down to me on the ground. He would have someone on the branch below him and hand it to that person. And that person would hand it to someone. And that ripe mango would be handed down very carefully, because if they dropped it, I might not catch it. And even if I did, it might hurt my hands, or it might hit my hands too hard. and squish the fruit, maybe even break the fruit. We don't want that. So the fruit would be handed down very carefully. So he says, rather, it has come down carefully through the chain of disciplic succession without change or disturbance. The process of disciplic succession of the Bhagavat school, and this is an important point, suggests that in the future also, Srimad Bhagavatam has to be understood from a person who is factually a representative of Shukadeva Goswami. So Srila Prabhupada makes this very big point. And he addresses it especially in terms of professional recitation of Bhagavatam, the paid Bhagavat Saptahas that have been famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, in India for eons. But the real essence there is that we need to hear it from someone who actually has expertise in relishing that taste. So Srila Prabhupada points out that the serious student of Srimad Bhagavatam should receive the message of the Bhagavatam through the chain of disciplic succession coming from Srila Shukadeva Goswami himself. So that's those are some highlights from Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'm going to take a look at Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who makes the same points about the importance of disciplic succession, handing the fruit down. So when I talked about this Ashirvad Shloka, this blessing shloka actually being a Palastuti, we see Pala means fruit in Sanskrit. And so we actually have not literally, but in the richest of figurative language, we see the Bhagavatam as a fruit, as the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic knowledge. Now, Shukadeva Goswami points out elsewhere in his Tika that we can't actually find this fruit in the Vedas. Okay, let's see if I can find that one. He says, Krishna is rasa, the fruit, but this fruit is not directly situated on the tree of the Vedas. It has fallen down nearby, Galitam. It has fallen down nearby. This object, rasa, is not on the tree itself. It is not to be searched out in the Vedas, but rather it is to be found in the mouth of Shuka. And both Srila Prabhupada and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur point out as Shuka means parrot. It's a name for a parrot. And that when a parrot tastes a mango, the mango becomes sweeter by that parrot's having pecked at the mango. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but we do have, of course, we have a lot of birds here in Honolulu, but we, in our neighborhood, we have some green parrots, ring-necked green parrots who fly in pairs. There's one pair that we see quite frequently, and sometimes we'll see one or two other pairs of these ring-necked green parrots flying in the neighborhood, and they will land in the mango trees, and they will taste those mangoes, especially those that are high up, away from where anyone might easily pick them. So he says that this particular fruit can't actually be found in the Vedas. It's fallen from the tree. When a fruit gets very ripe, it falls from the tree. So we try to pick it as close to possible as when we're going to use it before it falls, because if it falls, it might break. So this fruit has fallen down. It's but very near the tree. So he says, one may say that Vyas, knowing that this fruit was very tasty, took it and put it in the mouth of his son out of affection. So, and then he says, Sukhamuhat can also indicate a cause, that the rasa becomes sweeter because of coming from the mouth of Shukadeva. And we can see practically through the commentaries of acharyas like Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Sridhar, the ancient Sridhar Swami, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Srila Prabhu, and our Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, how these texts, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, becomes even more accessible, more readily relishable when we get it from the mouth of our acharyas, who are tuned most specifically in to the needs of their particular audience. So, and then, oh, this is nice. He says, Bhuvi indicates Brajabhumi. Bhavuka and Rasika indicate the dear gopis. These are the devotees who are most expert at tasting rasa. So he says, drink the sweetness of the rasa arising from his form, the Bhagavatam, or it can means relish the rasa up to the point of embracing Krishna, alaya. Now, we see earlier something that we hear often from Guru Maharaj, how to taste this ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic knowledge, which has fallen from that tree nearby. Just as Krishna says we understand that this fruit can't actually be found in the tree, because even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that we should be wary of the flowery words of the Vedas. The Vedas present the four Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. And because of the focus on those things and the lack of attention to exclusive devotional service to Krishna, Narada Muni refers to them in the first canto of the Bhagavatam with a very striking word, jugupsitam. Jugupsitam means detestable. So because they may have a tendency to distract people from this point, from this particular goal, this Panchama Purushartha, this real prayojana, prema prayojana. Therefore, they're considered detestable, at least in comparison with Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not that the Vedas and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are inherently detestable, because they are all meant for the elevation of humankind, and even for enjoying some rasa to some extent, some of the scriptures. But next to the Bhagavatam, they're all not just useless, but perhaps even detestable, jugupsita. So this fruit is different. So Vishwanath, when he talks about the fruit being passed down from branch to branch, coming down step by step through Shukadeva Goswami to King Parikshit, from Sutta Goswami to the sages of Naimisharanya, and so on. Then he poses a question. How is this fruit to be consumed? That is explained, he says. One should drink it. For this fruit is the essence of taste, rasam. It doesn't have skin, it doesn't have a seed, it doesn't have strings, it doesn't have anything objectionable at all. And then he talks about how we should enjoy it, the extent to which we should drink this juice, this rasa. He says laya means liberation, or attaining the conditions of, it can mean sayuja mukti, but it also can mean attaining salokya, sarshti, samipya, and sarupya. So it means that this fruit goes beyond liberation. Or he says, laya can refer to the eighth of the Ashtasattvika bhavas, the 8 involuntary physical expressions of bhava. We're talking about bhavukas here. People who are expert in relishing, expert in tasting, people in bhava. So the the eighth of the Ashtasattvika bhavas, the 8 involuntary expressions of bhava, is pralaya. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says here, when we talk about laya, we could be talking about pralaya. So therefore, we should drink until we develop the 8 symptoms, all the way up to the final one, pralaya, fainting, dead away. So we should drink until we pass out. And then he says, though one will not be able to drink the nectar when one is fainted, when the fainting wears off, one again awakens to consciousness and again begins drinking until one faints again. And then he says, one cannot give up drinking. In other words, when we've developed the taste for this, it means we're addicted to that taste. We become addicted to that taste. Just as we see in the 5th chapter, those who experienced, those who've engaged in devotional service to Krishna are called rasagraha. They become haunted by rasa, Vishwanath says, as if by a ghost that we can't shake. So we become addicted to this fruit. And when the fainting wears off, we again regain consciousness and begin drinking until we pass out again. So this is how we enjoy relishing Srimad Bhagavatam. We drink through the ears, from the mouth of the sadhu, the mouth of the guru. And then he says, and this is the third understanding of the word pavuka that I referred to earlier. He says, there's another reading of pavuka, and that would mean those who, persons who perform actions for tasting that which is beautiful. So in other words, drunkards. In Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's metaphor here, these would be drunkards. These would be people who are completely addicted to this, to the taste of this fruit, which is nothing but juice, no seed, no skin, no strings, nothing but juice, and the sweetest possible juice, having been tasted by Shukadev, Sutta, and so many other acharyas. And then he cites Bhattanayaka, who I assume is probably a Sanskrit grammarian who's composed some kind of Sanskrit dictionary, says that a permanent emotion is established by actions related to tasting the beautiful. So we see at the very beginning of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, when Uttama Bhakti, or pure devotional service, Shuddha Bhakti, is defined, it's action, it's activity. It's not just a sentiment, but it's an ongoing active culture of behavior that's intended to give pleasure to Krishna, right? That's how we find it in the 11th verse of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So, in other words, so these are, the bhavukas are people who are constantly bellying up to the bar of Srimad Bhagavatam and asking for another. A tall one, please, if you please. And he says no one else would be able to claim this. He says muhur may have another meaning. Though one has drunk it, by again drinking it, one develops more relish for it. This refers only to the devotees, for they develop rati, or bhava, which becomes the sthayi bhava. becomes one of those 12 Mukhya Ratis or Gauna Ratis. So then he says, in that position, they can taste the rasa of the Bhagavatam. Oh, auspicious persons, pabuka, another meaning, very auspicious, very fortunate. We see that in Monia Williams as well. You are the most auspicious, and those who can't relish this taste, inauspicious. So he says, pabuka means those who appreciate the Lord, who himself is rasa personified. We see that in the Upanishads, raso vaisaha, right? Krishna, God is rasa. And rasa means not just love. Sometimes I'll say, oh, this suggests God is love. But this isn't some kind of static love. This isn't some sort of sentiment or static appreciation of the Lord. This is an ongoing, progressive activity engaged in with the intention of giving pleasure to the Lord. So, so these are a number of the points that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes with relation to this verse. I'm going to see if I have anything. No, actually, that is pretty much it. So this verse tells us, not just the blessing, but how we can receive that blessing. So we approach the Guru with a couple of attitudes, right? Krishna tells us in Bhagavad Gita, tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. Three things are necessary for our being eligible to taste the sweetness of the instructions, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chittete Koriyaki, that we live for, the words that come from the Guru's mouth. So, Tadvidhi Pranipatena, Pranipat, Pariprashna, and Sevya. So these three elements need to be there in our approach to the bartender at the bar of Srimad Bhagavatam. So pranipat means submission. What's the old proverb we hear from like samurai texts or something like that? Chop wood, carry water. So Chanakya Pandit tells us that just as we get, so pranipat means submission. I want to get to the other one. I want to use the other one later. Means submission. It means that we hear with an open heart. We understand that the Guru is superior. The Guru is, in the language of the Bhagavatam, the sum total of all the demigods, in a sense. And so we approach very submissively. Whatever the Guru says, we are eager to hear. Pariprashna. Pariprashna means relevant inquiries. Inquiries relevant to the particular subject matter. And here, we're talking about Brahma Jigyasa, right? Not just Brahma Jigyasa, but Rasa Jigyasa. We're talking about inquiries into the nature of actually relishing the taste of service to the Lord. And that brings up the third quality with which we should approach the Guru. The third quality with which we should approach, that we should bring to our attempts to relish Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is seva. So we see in like some of these samurai stories that the student has to chop wood, carry water. The student engages in whatever service the Guru requires. Even if you come from a very, in Vedic culture, even if you come from a very high-class Brahmana family, we approach the Guru as menial servants, eager to do whatever the Guru requires. And speaking of chop wood, carry water, we see that example even in Krishna himself. When he was in the school of Sandipani Muni, journey with his friend Sudama. We know that they went out to the forest one night and were caught in a terrible rainstorm because some firewood was needed for the next day's Homa. So, Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena and sevaya. These three things are required for actually being able to relish the taste of Srimad Bhagavatam. This helps us become pavikas. It helps us become expert and thoughtful. It helps us become, maybe a little mad after hearing the Bhagavatam. So this is how we drink this. This is how we relish this fruit. We drink it through our ears from the mouths of the sadhus, especially the spiritual master. Okay, so it's about 1:15 now, and I think this would be a good time for me to stop and entertain any discussion, questions, or comments with which we can wrap up our dabbling, just kind of like dipping our toes in the edge of the ocean of the Srimad Bhagavatam's Mangalacarana. So I believe the settings are that so the devotees can unmute themselves. I'm going to stop the sharing so I can see who's here. Oh, I see comments. Katarina. Any comments, questions?
Good morning, Maharaj. I have
Kanaram, I can't hear you.
Oh, let's see. Let me fix my buttons.
You may have to fiddle with some control under the... Oh, maybe I need to do something. I think I need to unmute the original audio. Okay, let's see what happens now. Kanaram?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I certainly can.
The classic, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I had one bit of insight about the nature of the mango becoming sweeter after it's been pecked by the mango. And this is a little bit different, but in the north, like up in Finland and Estonia, I think that those guys traditionally, if they wanted to harvest wood for building houses or whatever, they would actually damage. They would take an axe and a longer implement, like a sharp implement on a long handle, and they would damage the bark of the tree. And they would even like make a girdle around the trunk of the tree and then wait for a year or some time. And the nature of that injury to the tree would cause the sugars in the tree to mature in the right way. And that wood would be even more valuable or long lasting or something like that. So I assume the science behind the tasting of the mango, that would be a similar science.
Perhaps something like that. I'm a little startled to hear that they would girdle the tree, because my experience is, well, if they just cut the bark, if they don't cut into the phylum, I guess it would be one thing. But I had to, at our home on the Big Island, when I was in family life, in the very back of our lot was an enormous albizia tree. Albizia is it's a tree that was introduced there because it fixes nitrogen in the soil. And but it's also an invasive species and very prolific. And it became a nuisance outward because the wood is very brittle. Albizia wood is very brittle. So it's a little dangerous to have a lot of albizia trees around your place. If a storm comes, and storms do come in Hawaii, then you may have branches falling in your yard or on your house. Although generally out where I live, we keep the trees away from the house because we live on catchment water that we catch on our roofs that goes into a cistern, a catchment tank. And that's the water that we drink and bathe and clean things with, which is really cool. We wash our hair with rainwater. So we have very soft hair when we live out there. So I had this huge albizia tree in the back of our lot. And every year when it was in season, I would see thousands, just thousands of albizia seeds floating throughout the neighborhood, alighting in my neighbors' yards. And so there would be thousands upon thousands of little albizia trees sprouting up in my neighbors. So I realized, as much as it hurts to do so, I have to kill this tree. And I did it because it's huge. I mean, I don't remember how big around it was. The diameter of the trunk was probably 7 or 8 feet. It was just an enormous tree. And they're quite lovely. They're really nice looking trees, but the wood is so brittle and they spread so easily that they're just seen as a nuisance. So I had to girdle the tree. And the results were quite dramatic. It died very quickly. And within a few months, I remember the first time I heard a very large branch fall from the tree. And this is way back in our lot. I heard the crash, and it was so loud that it took me a moment to try to figure out what it was. So I was a little startled to hear about that they might girdle the tree. But if they just cut into the bark and just cut the bark and don't harm the phylum, and perhaps it'll be okay. So yeah, it might be something. It might be something like that. It might be something that, when the bird pecks into the fruit, that it stimulates the production of sugars even more quickly than just the sun and the maturing of the fruit, that it hastens the fruit's maturation. A little hard to say. Thank you for that, though.
Yeah. Thank you for being such a charming barkeep.
Sharda has a question. Would you say, Ted, that to have a taste for hearing the Bhagavatam, one would have to have reached the point of ruchi, or a taste for the Lord's name first? We might think that. We might think something like that ordinarily. Now, the more elevated we are, the finer and sharper that taste will be. But in his commentary on a verse in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, where Narada Muni is explaining to Vyasadeva just why it is he's feeling despondent, why he's feeling depressed. And he's pointing out the difference between bhakti and everything else. And so I mentioned this verse before. This is one of my very favorite of my 18,000 favorite verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, where he says that even if we fall away from our practice, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says we might do that because of poor determination. Srila Prabhupada says because of bad association. Even if we give up our practice, he says a couple of verses earlier in the 17th verse that, as we know, to get the fruit of Jnana Kanda or Karma Kanda or even Yoga Kanda, we have to practice them practically perfectly to get the fruit. And even when we get the fruit, it's temporary. Even if we attain Svarga, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, when your credit wears out, when that pious credit that got you to Svarga is exhausted, then Kshine Punya Martyalokam Vishanti. Then you have to come back down to a place like this, where everything is just nasty. We have nice moments, but the world has been thinking recently about finally, after a couple of years, perhaps emerging from this pandemic that we've been immersed in for the last 2 years. And here I'm just hearing in Hawaii, we're about to reopen our Govinda's restaurant sometime in the middle or late part of next month, because very soon, in the next few days, even mask restrictions will be lifted here in Hawaii. I'm not sure to what extent, but it sounds like So the world is thinking, okay, maybe, if another crazy variant doesn't show up, maybe we'll be able to emerge from this pandemic. And then boom, Russia invades Ukraine. And now we've got a war that could be very dangerous. So whatever it is we think is going on that's nice in this world, it's not going to last. Krishna describes the material world in 2 words in Bhagavad Gita, Dhukalayam Ashashvatam. There's suffering and it's temporary. Now we can take solace that in the fact that even the suffering is temporary, but certainly the things that we attain, that we aspire for, they're also temporary, and that creates some kind of suffering. So, Narada Muni is telling Vyasadeva that even if you don't execute your bhakti perfectly, and just as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, apichet suduracharo bhajate mam, bhakti is so powerful, it's so distinct from everything else that it can purify us even of the results of the most sinful activities if it's there in the heart. So we don't have to do it perfectly. We can even blow it big time. So he says that nothing is lost, just as Krishna says in the Gita, there's no loss or diminution for one who's on this path. He says, nothing is lost because there will always remain the memory of that taste that one got serving the lotus feet of the Lord. That rasa graha, we remain haunted by that rasa. And then he says in his commentary on this verse, okay, Carolina, am I going too fast? Okay. I get excited about this. So he says, so rasagraha sounds like, well, at least it's got to be ruchi or asakti, right? At least there's got to be ruchi or asakti. He says, but actually, this begins from our very first day of worshiping the Lord. And then he cites a verse from the 11th canto, the instructions to King Nimi by the Navayogendras, showing that the verse compares it. I don't remember which of the sages. I still haven't memorized that wonderful chart that that Sakyarati and Sham have made for me. I have to flog myself for a little bit, maybe to remind myself. But one of the sages says that he compares it with eating a meal. So he says, just as when we eat a meal, 3 things happen simultaneously and progressively. Tushti, pushti, kshudapaya. So some pleasure, some nourishment, and relief from hunger. And it begins with the very first morsel of rice. So, so it is with bhakti. 3 things happen simultaneously when we actually engage in worshiping the Lord. Bhakti, a sense of devotion, actual devotion itself because we're actively worshiping the Lord. Pareshanobhava virakti. So pareshanobhava means bhakti, direct experience of the Lord. And sometimes that even can be something as simple as relishing the taste of some really nice prasadam, or a really enlivening discourse of Hari Katha, or a really wonderful kirtan that carries us away on its waves. Bhakti pareshanobhava and viraktiranyatra, detachment from everything else. So bhakti is that pleasure, pareshanobhava is the nourishment, the pushti, and the viraktiranyatra is the kshudapaya, the slaking or relief from hunger. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur uses this verse to support his assertion that the ability to relish that taste begins from the very first day of our worshiping the Lord. It can begin from the very first day of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. to some extent, it won't be as intense as when we actually become a bhavuka, when we actually are driven a little crazy by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, when we become addicts, drunkards. But there will be some taste there. And look at us. Here it is. There's more than a half a dozen of us gathered together here to hear some guy prattle on for an hour about one verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. Very cool verse. So, even we have some taste. Padmanabha Maharaj, I have enough of a taste that Padmanabha Maharaj was able to induce me to just like break right in the middle of my morning program and spend it with you all so that we can discuss these things. I see there's another chat here. Oh, that's a thank you. Yeah, so it's a progressive thing, but it begins from our first taste of Srimad Bhagavatam. And I think many of us have, we're able to have some, we if we're honest, we have some experience that confirms this. Is there anything else? Next month, we'll discuss the 10 offenses against the holy name. Padmanabha Maharaj has managed to string me out for one more month. I was just thinking, I need 1 month when I have when I don't have this complication in my morning program. And Padmanabha Maharaj says, could you talk about something in March? I have a couple of ideas and we liked this idea. So starting next Friday, we'll discuss the 10 offenses against the holy name, particularly in the light of, there's some discussion in the Bhakti Sandarbha, and certainly there's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinam and Chintamani, where, as he is wont to do, Lord Chaitanya makes one of his devotees the teacher and himself the student. And Haridas Thakur instructs Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the glories of the holy name by emphasizing the importance of avoiding taking them casually in any way at all. I thank you. Special thanks to Padmanabha Maharaj and to Sakyarati and Shamananda for facilitating this, for Karalina and the others who serve as interpreters when we are able to have them, and to all of you for giving me such a nice boost, bhakti boost to my morning. Now I get to go see Sri Sri Panchatattva with this bhakti boost to propel me. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Shri Bhakti Abhay Ashram Maharaj ki jai.